The following story contains subject matter that might be unsuitable or disturbing to some audiences. Viewer discretion is advised. It wasn't her fault. The fighting raged below her room as igneous rock and cloudy quartz bickered. Their voices rose and lowered as they took shots at one another. Both of them were heated and enraged.
I know she's not mine. Look at her,
Igneous bellowed, his hooves stomping the floorboards. He had been stomping his hooves and snorting like a feral stallion a lot since her birth.
She is yours,
came her mother's reply.
I promise I didn't. You did.
The wood beneath his hooves cracked, and he bellowed at her.
You have been unfaithful. You must be punished, and you must repent.
Her mother seemed to shrivel, even her voice becoming small.
My mother is pink. Perhaps it's like her,
Cloudy Quartz tried to say, but was cut off. Their arguing left the area right below Surprise's room and moved elsewhere, muffled and quieter now. The filly could not make out anything as they faded off. She knew her father would not physically harm her mother, for she was showing now with the bump upon her stomach that was to soon be one of Surprise's siblings. She hoped it was a brother. Boys had more freedom than girls on the farm, and if he was a fun brother, she could sneak off under the excuse of babysitting him. She wanted to leave her room. Her stomach ached terribly. Mother had forgotten her lunch and her dinner. Surprise was born amylanistic. The local doctor who had helped deliver her had even said that amylanism happened. It was more of a blessing than a curse. The doctor had been an old earth pony who worked for Cloudy's family. She had delivered Cloudy Quartz, Granny Pie, and supposedly even Great Granny Pie. She was certain whatever amylanistic meant it was not a blessing. She was cursed. Her heart ached at how angrily her father looked upon her. She didn't have his eyes. She didn't have his mane. She was white. She was amylanistic. Surprise Pie had no idea the reason for Igneous's anger was actually her wings. He hated them and looked upon the young female with hatred. A pegasus on the rock farm was useless. She could not buck, her wings were not useful, and she was too weak to fly rocks around. In fact, Surprise had no one to teach her to fly. Even Granny Pie had no wings. Surprise felt small, smaller than her small body already was. He was smart enough to accept she was cursed with a white pelt and a yellow mane by some cruel being, or perhaps she was a sign from their greater beings. Celestia was white, and once she had bore a pink mane. Yellow was close to gold, however, and he knew they would want her gold. Surprise was a curse and a blessing. She could go either way. He was not going to let that befall his line, a line of earth ponies who mined rocks. She took delicate steps down the stairs and into the kitchen. Her parents had little in their cupboards. Claiming to want for too much was a sign of greed. She poured cow's milk into a bowl of bran flakes and chewed, debating if she should return to the bedroom and hide the bowl once emptied beneath her bed. She was better off there, but if the bowl was found, her father raised his voice often, but he wouldn't hit her, would he? The fear of it made her jump, wings flailing as she failed to fly when she realized she was no longer alone. She spun on her wobbling legs, angry eyes beheld her. Surprise felt fear. The bowl hit the floor, wet and soggy bran splattering across the wood. The milk went everywhere, a puddle with streaks across the counter, the cabinet doors, and the sink behind her. She knew her fur would stink.
wasting our food,
Igneous said, now behind Cloudy.
You dare to—
I didn't mean to! Mom scared me!
She was silenced by his hoof slamming into the spoon. It flipped across the room. Her father towered over her, angrier than ever before. Wasting food was forbidden.
"Blaming your mother,"
he said, disgusted and clearly taking in the sight of her mess. The milk had been taken from the neighbor's cows by hoof. The cereal had been made with a grain machine. All had taken hours of hard work he saw she had wasted. Surprise sniffled and recoiled as he knelt down. Initially, Surprise had no idea what he was doing. Her father gathered it all into a mushy pile, then pushed it into the bowl. It had a few hairs sticking out, clearly yellow and hers. Surprise met his eyes, not understanding.
"Papa?"
The bowl was lifted in his hoof and slowly set before her. The spoon was put into the mush.
I don't understand."
His cold eyes grew stern.
"We do not waste in this house." "Papa!"
The bowl was shoved against her leg, insistently and with some force. She winced. Behind him, Cloudy stared at a wall. Was her mother truly going to not even watch? Surprise's wings lifted, then lowered. She nervously took the bowl in her hooves and stared down at it. She had nibbled on mud pies, held a dirty hammer, but eating the soggy mess now, with Igneous staring down at her, it made her throat get tight.
"But please don't."
He shoved it firmer, bowl bumping into her damp chest.
"You will eat nothing else until you eat that."
He stepped away.
"Make sure she does,"
was his parting words to Cloudy. Initially, Surprise had called their bluff. It lasted all of the night. Come the morning, she had been ignored as both parents moved around her. Surprise Pie had not budged from the counter. She was smelling of spoiled milk, and so was the food. She looked to Cloudy and Igneous for pity, but got none. Finally, broken, she lifted the spoon to her mouth and closed her eyes. It tasted sour, and it was the texture of wet bread. She gagged, but ate. The entire ordeal was witnessed by both parents, who nibbled on chicken eggs fried and laid upon toast. Cloudy was far more hesitant to eat before her gagging daughter. The morning sickness had racked her body the past few days brutally. She chewed upon the toast and hoped it would fight back her vomit. Surprise finished as Igneous nudged Cloudy and warned her to stay inside and not work. He left to harvest rocks. Surprise felt terribly ill. Her stomach twisted and rolled within her small body.
Mother, that was awful."
Cloudy said, staring outside and ignoring her. She didn't stay in the kitchen. That night, Surprise had hidden under her bed. Igneous Rock had called her out for faking being ill, but she had truly fallen sick. The sickness lasted 3 days, and during that her parents had stopped walking into her bedroom. They had never knocked, but while she fought back vomiting for fear of her father making her eat it, she had noticed they didn't spend time searching for her anymore. Whatever fight they'd had during her second sick day must have been bad, or something else had to be at hoof. She fell into a fever and curled up, refusing to vomit, refusing to eat. She snuck bowls of water. They tried less and less to stop her as she moved through the house. She fell ill, and then one day awoke. Her body stank of old milk. Her stomach wanted proper food. This time, Surprise was far sneakier. She refused to be caught in the act. She grabbed the bran flakes and ran. As she fled into the dawn, she avoided the pie and quartz mines. Both of her families would tell for sure if they saw their latest descendant hiding with food and acting suspicious. She found an abandoned mine and walked its length. She then followed the veins of the mine and found herself mesmerized. She ate her bran flakes and wished they had been oats instead. Oats with honey was a Granny Pie special, along with sweets. Surprise loved sweets, but she had only had them for a few occasions. On Cloudy and Surprise's birthdays, Granny Pie would throw confetti and string balloons and bring in both cupcakes and a birthday cake. It was Surprise's favorite day. But it only was good if Igneous was out of town during those days, which had happened twice. Igneous saw the act of birthdays as a day of self. Thinking of the self meant one was selfish. Surprise Pie wanted to be good. Being selfish wasn't good. Stealing bran flakes wasn't good either. She tried to think of a lie to explain them being gone now, but lying was bad too. After finishing the food, Surprise broke down and cried. That dawn she spent working on the rock farm. Determined, Surprise did her best to work at the stones. Geodes were what they made their hard earnings off of, and often the simple rocks tossed aside by mere visitors were gorgeous within. Surprise wanted to be like those geodes too, but her mother had told her she was only pretty outside, and that was her curse. A pony such as she was destined to inspire lust and envy in others. Surprise had no idea what lust was, only that it was bad. She knew envy meant jealousy. She did not think she was worth being jealous of, for she had nothing herself. They had started finding her scarier after that day. Her body she often washed in the lake shone too bright, and her muscles slowly built. She was growing up. Cloudy had changed with the pregnancy. Her talks with Igneous no longer disagreed when he said Surprise was frightening. The Pegasus had slowly mastered floating, and sometimes peered down at them, eavesdropping without either looking her way. The first few times they had called her an angel of death and shuddered back. Surprise Pie hadn't understood, but to Igneous Rock and Cloudy Quartz, she had a white halo of light and seemed to block out the sun. Their paranoid minds had taken this as a sign, as an omen. Cloudy had stopped defending Surprise, and it had made Surprise ache inside. Surprise spent the day eating stolen food. No longer did Igneous or Cloudy scold her. They left her to mix flour and eggs and milk into bowls. It made her father scowl, but he no longer spoke to her besides calling her a creature sent to punish them. It was beginning to hurt less. Her first cupcakes were more like doughy puddles. Surprise had enjoyed them anyway, even though the eggshells had made a terrible crunchy texture at the bottom of the tins. Sugar was kept in the highest cabinet, and only an adult, or a pegasus, could reach it. She had been ignored by both parents as they'd left, seemingly in a terrible hurry. Their wagon was drawn and they left her for several days. Each morning, Surprise made pastries, mostly cupcakes, and a failed cake. Granny Pie had come and babysat her, but in her eyes, Surprise could see a terrible age. She let Granny Pie teach her. She got better for several days. Then Granny Pie left, hugging her and doing her best to comfort the pained child she saw behind those wide, purple eyes. That night she'd overheard her parents talking. Igneous was mentioning getting rid of her. It broke her heart a little when he suggested shipping her off to Granny Pie and never going to his mother-in-law and getting her back. All because she had a sibling now. She had discovered her newborn sister while looming in the kitchen, wondering what could taste good in a cupcake or how to whisk frosting right. She had a sister. A sister. Igneous had sneered and forbade her from going to see her. Cloudy had pulled away and shut the door upon her peeking face, telling her not to get close to her sibling. "Limestone doesn't want to see you," she'd said, bags still beneath her eyes. "Limestone?" "Enough!" Igneous had snapped. Surprise had been so excited, though. She wanted to see the little pony. She was older now, and she was ready to babysit. Sure, Limestone Pie wasn't a little brother, but she was certainly a friend to be made. She smiled as she pondered over playing with this Limestone Pie she'd yet to see. The door kept being shut in her face, and finally, her father informed her she was never to enter the room. Should she dare, he would finally punish her the way a growing girl who rebelled deserved to be. With violence. He would get the switch. Her dreams were crushed. She returned to cooking, her mind filled with images of them growing up together, and her finally having a friend, as she pretended to not be mulling over ignoring what they said. They had told her not to go into that room. It was wrong. It meant she was bad. It meant she'd be going against the hard work and proving herself as bad, as just the evil pegasus she was seen as by her parents. She needed to listen to them. But Surprise did not want to obey. It had been another long day before Surprise could slip along the house and not be noticed. Her parents had spoken about her, and especially about how frightening she was.
She steals, she disobeys, she flits about. She is everything we don't want Limestone to be,
Igneous had said, his voice stern. He had walked right past her, and even if he was aware Surprise was there, he didn't acknowledge her. Her parents laid Limestone down to rest, fussed and cooed, and seemed to not notice her on the other side of the wall. Cloudy was warned by Granny Pie not to work too hard after another child, but she was guided outside to work by Igneous.
What if she wakes? Children must learn to cry themselves out and be silent.
It reminded Surprise she had been a silent baby. She had never cried without feeling pain. Her parents had truly feared her. As they toiled outside, Surprise was quiet. She trotted to her baby sister's bedroom, a small spare room that had once been Surprise's own before she was grown. She slipped inside it, careful to not knock anything out of place. She was small, so she took care to close the door and move around the space. It was the same pink it had been for her. She wondered if the wall paint would ever be replaced. Perhaps a future brother would change that. She didn't know why her parents had kids. They didn't seem happy with them. Her little sister laid in a crib. She had to climb the chair to lean over it before dropping the side. She stood before her. She bore a small gray mane, very pale. It reminded Surprise of a storm cloud when it first got heavy. Her sister's fur was a periwinkle, almost violet. It stuck out to her. Why weren't her parents upset about her sister's fur? She felt anger at her parents, not Limestone. The foal yawned and opened her eyes, then shut them, a burbling of a sound escaping her lips. An adorable frown came to her face. She looked unlike their parents, and odd. Although Granny Pie was pink, so maybe it was something about them all that made them special.
Limestone Blinky Pie,
Surprise whispered. The baby rolled over, then wiggled to her feet. She was wobbly, and Surprise wanted so badly to reach out and care for her. She didn't, fearful of if Blinky cried out. But Limestone didn't cry. She sat on her diapered butt and stared at Surprise. Surprise was glad she didn't need to rouse the foal. Finally, Limestone's eyes were fully open, and she stared at the pegasus. They were the eyes of their father. Surprise saw then why he had not become upset. Igneous had seen in Limestone's eyes that Cloudy was faithful. Placated, he had been calmer. Limestone cooed, babbling. Surprise grinned happily.
Hello, my name is Surprise. I'm your big sister. When you're older, you can call me by my middle name like I'm saying Blinky. Granny Pie picked my middle name. Oh, you should meet her!
She covered her mouth to be quieter. Limestone seemed content and didn't jump at the sudden peaking in the Pegasi's voice.
It's Spunky. Surprise Spunky Pie.
Limestone reached out and toothed on a plush crudely made from leftover clothing scrap by Cloudy. When it didn't give under her mouth, she pulled away and wobbled closer to Surprise. Surprise made sure she didn't fall out of the crib.
So you can be Blinky, and I can be Spunky.
She tapped her hoof a few times, then crouched playfully.
Spunky.
She stuck out her tongue, blowing a raspberry. In her movements, Limestone had come too close to the edge of the crib. As Surprise had dropped the side down, she tripped on the edge. She teetered and Surprise caught her in her slightly bigger legs. She used her wings to lift the crib's side as she moved Limestone away from it. Limestone stared up, unafraid.
Be careful, Limestone. You're little. Even a small fall like that can hurt you.
She held her outward and up. Limestone watched her arms, looked down, and mimicked it. Surprise was enamored. Limestone was adorable.
We can be friends when you're older. I'll finally have a friend.
She had ventured places before, but never made a friend in the town. Her parents' reputation had scared everyone away. She put her little sister down carefully. Leaning forward as Limestone tipped over, she blew a raspberry upon her stomach. The vibrations and the sudden onslaught of funny noises made Limestone squeal out far too loudly. Surprise chuckled as her baby sister flailed her limbs and leaned to repeat the action. The door was kicked open suddenly. Her mother burst in, fear in her eyes as she glared at her with wide pupils.
Surprise pie!
The voice held a silent threat, and she looked ready to fight to protect Limestone. Protect her from her big sister. Surprise recoiled but didn't move from the squirming foal.
I was only playing with her.
Cloudy pushed her aside, a hoof catching Surprise in the chest. She fell to the floor, and Limestone cried out, surprised by the sharp wail. Her cry of panic was ignored as Cloudy walked past Surprise's body and tucked her youngest into the cradle. Surprise tried to get up. She reached out to soothe the Limestone, but her hoof got only to the edge of the crib before Cloudy pushed her, then slapped her across the face.
You were told no!
She yelled.
We said not to enter!
Her voice bellowed and bounced against the undecorated pink walls. She stamped her hooves, much like Igneous did, and demanded,
Get out of this room! Go to your room! Go! Go now!
Surprise fled in fear. She'd been struck thrice, and each blow hurt her young body far worse than the last. But the words, on top of the physical pain, cut her to her core. She fled to her room, ducking her head beneath a blanket that had yet to be washed. She heard Limestone's crying still, and it made her feel utterly miserable. She had no idea if the misery was ever going to end. She hadn't done anything wrong. Limestone had been happy. Why was her mother so mad? She laid in bed, sobbing into her hooves. Why couldn't she hold Limestone? Why was she forbidden from playing with her sister? Why? That night, her food was brought to her. Surprise swore it tasted off, but ate it anyway. Her parents were terrible cooks and often thought the seasonings found in and around the rock mines were a good addition to soup, when it wasn't. Once a soup had been so spicy they'd all expected to drain the well to cool their burning mouths. She had finished the food when her eyes grew heavy. She'd flopped onto the bed. When her eyes opened, she knew she'd been asleep a long time, probably the longest of any of her sleeps. She'd wondered why the rooster had not awoken her. Her body was cold, and as the Pegasus opened her eyes, she realized two things. She was in the dim darkness, and she was lying on the hard stone floor of her parents' cellar. She rose to her legs, body complaining as it felt tired for some reason despite her long sleep. Surprise's wings sagged against her sides. She felt dizzy. After a while it passed, became a duller feeling. Light from the door above her shone in through fat cracks and shone against stone steps. At the opposite end of the cellar, sunlight shone in through a small crack along the wall. They were too high for Surprise to touch, and her wings didn't want to move too much at the moment. She trotted up the steps and touched the cellar door. It did not open. Surprise's purple eyes grew wide. She banged on the wood.
Mama? Papa?
She called out.
Mama?
She wailed again. She pressed an ear against the wood after several cries. She swore she might have heard whispering on the other side. Her heart hammered. She looked all around her. There were old rations in crates nailed shut. A water barrel was also tacked shut. She looked and saw blankets in a corner and a bucket. What was the bucket for? She walked the cellar's space. It was a room, bigger than her own, and bigger than the one Limestone was in. But it wasn't huge, nor was it lit. It was mostly empty. She'd seen it only twice in her life. No, this was the third time. She remembered how it looked in spring with food removed and needing restocked. Once it had been for weathering a storm, or even the winter. A part of it had a deep hole, and the top was a rock with a smaller hole over it. She sniffed, her nose curled up. It was a bathroom, likely dug so deep it connected to a river, or maybe even a mine shaft. They had thought of everything back in the old days when the cellar had been made, even on how to stop waste from piling up with so many ponies trapped in one space. When she picked up a loose piece of stone and dropped it in, she listened. It never hit the bottom. Surprise shivered and moved away from the toilet hole. She banged on the doors again, but as she rattled the wood, a pair of beady eyes stared at her, then moved past her leg, seemingly not caring she was there. It dashed away when she screamed. Surprise's heart pounded. She pictured her mother or father rescuing her. She yelled louder than her small lungs could handle, and eventually she was coughing and sitting, trying to breathe again. It was terribly hard for her to get air into her lungs again. Her throat was raw. Between her coughs, she swore she heard a stallion's voice speaking. She leaned against the door, still puffing and huffing. She recognized it. It was her father's voice. Her mother's voice came next. It was harder to hear than while in her bedroom. She had to focus and strain her ears. A hoof touched the wood and made a few taps.
"You either get away from the door or I don't come in,"
Cloudy said, and her voice was flat as Granny Pie's when Grampy Pie's funeral was brought up. It was hollow. There was no shadow cast as the door was open. Instead, her mother was cast in darkness, only the edges of her in the light. She could see the rocks that weighed on the door behind Cloudy. They'd recreated a cave-in and trapped her there. She looked up at her mother, hoping she was saved. Perhaps this was all one big nasty prank. Cloudy met her eyes, backlit by the light from above the cellar.
Mama, please. Please, I'll be good. I'll never be bad again.
She whimpered, her wings covering her face from the light.
"I will leave if you don't go to the bottom of the stairs."
Over time, Surprise had learned to identify a lie. She had done it with sellers in the marketplace, and had silently done it while watching foals her age talking. In Cloudy's face was no lie. Her mother was truly ready to abandon her.
All the way down. Now.
Her heart broke. She moved down the stairs, hearing her mother's hooves click behind her as she went. Making her way down to the bottom, she lingered in her path, and though surprise could flutter, she knew she'd not make it past. She wasn't even sure she wanted to go past Cloudy and face Igneous. He had always been worse. Surprise craned her head back.
Mama, why? Why am I down here?
Every drop of fear she felt was in her trembling voice.
On your father's orders.
For only a moment, Cloudy's voice wavered, then snapped back to being cold and callous.
You are to remain in the cellar from now on. Surprise Pie, we have had it. You're wrong. You've brought us nothing but misfortune. You are an evil child and a curse. I should have never had you. You must be kept out of the sight of every pony and never seen.
What did I do? Why?
Her lower lip trembled, and she felt struck in the chest all over again.
What did I...
As she moved closer, trying to hug her mother's leg, Cloudy recoiled. She had anger on her face, hatred, even as her tears reached her cheeks.
I don't know what happened, what went wrong. I believed in you. You were my first foal to be born alive. You were so hard to carry. I suffered the entire pregnancy. Every pony said it was normal. But you were a parasite. I have given birth to a pegasus.
She stamped her hooves and scared Surprise backwards, away from herself.
I was so weak, so frail. I couldn't eat. It all came back up. I wasted so many meals over carrying you. Celestia, it was your wings when I felt kicking. I was feeling your wings flutter, not your hooves kick. The experience of having you was the worst feeling I felt in my whole life.
Lowering herself slowly, Surprise's expression was fear and sadness.
Mama.
She was pinned with a glare, and her stomach touched the cold stone as she cowered lower.
I don't understand, Mama.
Your father wants a big family. But Limestone scared me, she admitted,
ignoring her daughter's terror before her. Cloudy's emotions were the focus, and Surprises were nothing in that moment.
I was terrified. In my head, that torment was about to begin again. But no. She was in my belly those many months, Surprise, and it was like a vacation. No bleeding from sin for almost a year. She lay in my belly, and I had to get the doctors to tell me she wasn't another dead foal. She was so calm inside of me, and when the labor came, it was so easy. I was amazed, shocked that it was over so fast. And I remember after I had you, what you'd done while inside of me. That you had this amylinism, and that you had wings, and I realized this was all wrong.
She took a step forward, leaning over the shriveled small foal on the cellar floor.
You are evil, Surprise. No foal born in the village has wings. None of them have your eyes. And they don't look at us like you do. No pony here acts like you. You are a curse upon us, and we have tried to repent.
Surprise jumped to her hooves and moved to hug her crying mother. She wailed as her arms parted.
What did I do wrong?
In an instant, Cloudy Quartz had spun on her hooves. She hesitated, fear upon her face as she looked back, and thus the hoof that kicked Surprise still hurt, striking her on the chest and sending her flying backward. She hit the floor and lay in a crumpled heap. The thought to get up flickered, and then faded from her mind.
We both wanted rid of you! Your father wanted to dispose of you, to kill you!
At Surprise's confusion, she yelled,
But I knew if we did, we'd go to Tartarus and burn with Tirek torturing us. Since I am not willing to kill what I carried and suffered so long over, you are to remain down here. I will bring you blankets and food. But if you die here, it will not be our fault."
Surprise knew she meant they would not have to see her, or likely watch her go. Surprise was sobbing. Her long yellow mane touched and swept the stone floor as she sniffled and had snot run down her face. In all of her mistreatment, she had never thought she would be locked away. They had loved her, hadn't they? Her little heart was aching within her chest from how hard she sobbed and how she didn't want to believe they felt that way towards her. Sure, they had treated her horribly at times, but she had thought they'd still loved her.
"I did nothing wrong!"
Her body ached. She curled up, then got to her hooves, her body shaking from how weak she felt. She felt anger. Did they feel like this for Limestone? Limestone was innocent. No. Her mother loved Limestone.
"I don't deserve to die. You had me. You and Papa made me, and if you made me and I deserve to die, then you deserve to die. I want Papa to die. I hate him!"
Cloudy pursed her lips, but looked at the wall.
"We did nothing wrong. We were cursed."
She wanted to yell that good ponies didn't just get cursed, but her mother turned her nose up like she'd inhaled a bad smell and began to go up the stairs. Surprise yelped and cried out, hoping to grab her mother's tail, to pull her down and plead with her to stay, to love her. She was tossed with her mother's tail as she reared up. Had she been behind her legs, she'd have been bucked. Instead, as Cloudy's tail went taut with her weight, she fell off and tumbled down to the floor again. Her head lifted as the light was cut off. The door was slammed, and a loud, rough scraping sound came. The rocks rested back in place atop the door. She cried and began to yell hysterically. She bolted up the stairs, trying to buck and kick open the door. The rocks were too heavy, and the door had been made long ago to withstand both the Wendigos and tornadoes, both of which were far stronger than her. She bellowed out the cries for her parents. Her hooves scratched at the hard wood, making little lines of indents, and nothing else. She wailed at the top of her lungs and tried to scream for some pony, any pony, to save her. Even when she left the door to wail at the crack, the closest neighbors were across long fields and highly unlikely to hear. She made it many hours before her lungs gave out and her voice cracked. She hugged herself and pleaded for someone to save her. Soon Surprise sat on the blanket pile. She tipped the bucket and found brushes and small things, but nothing else. She brushed her mess of a mane, hoping if she looked decent, they might take pity. She was terribly cold. Her body felt exhausted. The pain of her crying hit all of her head. Her eyes burned, her brain ached, and her cheeks were sore from being stuck in the upset expression so long. She brushed her mane over and over, tears still pouring from her emotionally drained purple eyes. Once all the tangles were out, she buried her face into her arms and whispered to nobody but the rats slipping in from an unseen area.
Why?
She shivered and sniffled and kept repeating the same word until she fell asleep. Even when she woke, she once more succumbed to sleep, too emotionally drained to get up from where she'd lain. It was a year later when she finally got her cutie mark. Surprise had spent the time trying to appeal to her mother. She had made a ribbon from a worn blanket and tried to look cute. She had tried full sentences, baby talk, anything. Cloudy had only stared at her, a bit fatter and very, very emotionally dead, and got no results. That day she stared at the crack with the sunlight and imagined herself elsewhere. She pictured herself like a balloon, a lovely balloon, floating away from it all. In her head, she saw herself not as a balloon, but as a cloud. The cloud floated away to freedom. Nobody could contain the cloud. Surprise was focused on that. A free pegasus, away from the world. She was a bit dirty, but had used some of the water in the barrel in secret to attempt to clean herself. But in her mind, she was white and fluffy and floating to freedom. One day Surprise would be free. As she imagined this, she realized she'd been lied to so many times. The reality was there were terrible ponies. Ponies who would try to trap her, to hurt her. Surprise's life was not theirs. She had the right to be free and herself. There was no regaining the fantasy she had lived before. She was trapped, cold, and miserable. She watched a mouse and ducked under one of her blankets. The rats and mice there moved always away from the bathroom, knowing it was empty, and rarely touched the bucket. They knew the cellar better than she did. It was hard to make them out in the darkness. The mouse nibbled on bran flakes and breadcrumbs she had dropped. It moved closer, and when it was right before her, she raised her hoof. It barely responded. It was too confident. She brought it down hard and ignored the crunch. Her growing body was still hungry from the food she'd ate as breakfast. The mouse, which she now felt and realized was one of the rats, lay dead. Surprise brought it to her mouth and began to chew. Contrary to what most ponies knew, Surprise had been told by some old miners that herbivores could actually eat meat. They just didn't because the grass was easier to catch. In fact, some of the deer and elk often ate birds alive and whole, or consumed their skulls regularly. It was just with how the world was now that the old days were seen as barbaric. Some of the miners, when they hadn't known she was there, had been mean about her, but others had admitted they'd sampled meat and found it to be good. "Just don't let Celestia hear you," had been the running joke. This Celestia obviously would hate Surprise's new food choice. Meat was an odd taste, and she wished it was cooked, but she had no choice. The first few times she had felt bad, but it quickly had turned into a game. Some days she'd get 1, others she'd get 3. If she left food, more would come. She no longer felt regret about hurting or killing them, mouse or rat. She saw no difference. In her eyes, everyone was happy, and she was trapped. She felt anger, and it turned into hate. She didn't fight her mother when she visited. It only got her injured. A year had made her cease that. She hated her parents. They had left her. Surprise never wanted anyone to leave her ever again. She still thought about Limestone. She hoped her sister was okay. She had memorized all of the walls, and even tried to open the rations, but the crate had held fast. She no longer attempted escape, hoping to comply with her mom and get something like the love she'd once had. The fire of hope within her had been extinguished. No one had come for her. Not even Granny Pie. She wasn't even sure Granny Pie was still alive. Surprise didn't want to imagine her dead. Never once did her father step inside. She heard his voice once, a year ago, but it had never come back. Every few days, food was left on the stairs, regardless if she was awake or sleeping. She would leave water in a clean bucket, then take the empty bucket. It seemed the same 2 buckets were swapped out. The rat bones were dropped into the bathroom hole, along with leftovers not suitable for bait. Surprise tried countless times to plead to her mother, hoping that she'd let her out. Cloudy wouldn't speak to her. Her face had sagged and her eyes had lost most of their shine. She avoided eye contact with her. The more she did it, the more the Pegasus wanted to hit her. Some days she wanted to bash in her head, to break her skull like the mice, to... She was too weak still. Too small. She couldn't fly yet. The cellar made flying dangerous. And once she had fallen on her wing and had to treat it. She wasn't even aware of how to treat a wing injury. No pony in the village would know either. Sometimes rain would flood the area, and water would come in. It would flood faster than it would drain out the small tunnel going to the mine. Or the mine would flood and water would come up through the bathroom hole. She would climb up and wait it out, miserable and often too wet to fly or even sleep. She didn't believe she'd ever have a chance to get her revenge. They were still bigger than her. She needed time. She wanted to escape. She wanted to eat more than bran bread. Surprise wanted to bake again, to whisk frosting. She wanted to be the clouds floating away into the sky, free. But she knew she had no chance to escape. Her hope to be free was dead. Her motivation was as good as her eyesight. Surprise had no faith in ever being rescued. 20 years of imprisonment would prove her right. But one fateful day would prove her wrong.